Hey everyone, Steven here, and today I'm looking at the KOORUI G2741L, which packs some solid specs and a cool dual mode, so you can hit 320Hz at 1080p. And these dual mode monitors are becoming more and more popular, and for good reason, since it's basically like having two monitors in one. I don't want to get ahead of myself here though, so let's get into the specs. The KOORUI G2741L is a 27-inch IPS panel monitor with a dual mode where you can run this at 4K 160Hz, or you can double the refresh rate to 320Hz, but you have to drop this down to 1080p, so there's a bit of a trade-off there. This has a 1 millisecond response time, but they don't say if that's gray to gray or MPRT. This does have their DIC mode, so I'm assuming it's going to be that though. Which I've covered this in another review, but that is their dynamic image clarity response time. And with that, it's essentially an MPRT mode, so it's going to have that black frame insertion. I will cover this again when I get to the test results of the on-screen response time testing tool. This has a typical brightness of 350 nits and is VESA certified HDR 400, so this would have a peak brightness of at least 400 nits. The contrast ratio here is 1000 to 1, which is standard for IPS panel monitors, and this has 10-bit color, but it will be the 8-bit plus FRC, which for gaming will be just fine. For color gamut, this covers 100% of the sRGB and 95% of the DCI-P3. For ports, this has two HDMI 2.1, one DP 1.4, and a headphone jack. For the physical adjustments, this can raise and lower 100 millimeters, tilt forwards 5 degrees and backwards 20 degrees, and this can pivot 90 degrees in either direction. You don't have swivel here though. This is compatible with a 75mm by 75mm VESA pattern if you wanted to mount this, and something I always tend to forget because it's just something that's become standard with all the monitors I review, is this does have adaptive sync, which means you can enable G-Sync compatibility if you have an NVIDIA GPU. For all of the gameplay footage in this review, I do have G-Sync compatibility enabled. Inside of the box, you're going to get the monitor, stand, base, power brick with cable, DP cable, and user manual. Last, this comes with a 1-year warranty. Shifting over to the panel menu, the menu button is on the back of the bottom right hand side, and it's a single button, which I do prefer. Clicking this in once brings up the quick access menu, which has power in the center, input at the top, brightness on the right, main menu on the left, and exit on the bottom. Clicking over to the full panel menu, for the tabs you have game mode, brightness/contrast ratio, display, color, input, scenario mode, which is essentially picture presets, and then setting. Looking at the game mode tab, you have FreeSync Premium. You have to enable this in order to have access to the G-Sync compatibility mode. Then you have dark field bright effect, and this is at 0 by default, but you can increase to +10 or down to -10, and this is either going to increase the darker areas of the panel or it's going to make them brighter. It's kind of like a shadow boost mode. Then you have response time. This has normal, fast, and fastest, and then underneath this you have the DIC mode here, which is again like a MPRT mode. You have to turn FreeSync Premium off in order to have access to enable this. After this you have crosshair, timer, and then the dual mode display option. When you enable this, this is where you're going to get the 320 Hz at 1080p. Now if you look at the top right hand corner of the panel menu, you can see right now I'm in DP for the input. This is 1080p, and then it's running at 320 Hz with the racing picture preset. I have FreeSync Premium on, and then I have HDR off, so you have all that quick information in that upper right hand corner. The reason I currently have this on is because the on-screen display, or the in-panel menu that we're looking at right now, in 4K is really small because it's going off the resolution of the screen, where when it's in 1080p, it's much larger. You can't make any adjustments to the OSD. There is not an option to change the location, change the timer for it, increase the size, decrease the size. So in order to film this and still have it clear, I increased this to the 1080p, the dual mode here, so I could have a better picture of the OSD. After this, you have the brightness/contrast ratio tab. Here, you literally just find brightness, contrast, and then the dynamic contrast ratio. After this is the display tab. Here you have the aspect ratio, HDR, which only has off, game mode, and movie. Then you have sharpness and gamma only has 2 options. After this, you have the color tab. You have standard, warm, and cool for the presets, and then you have user, where you can go in and adjust the RGB values if you want to. After that, you have input, which is pretty self-explanatory. The only option there that would be something to be mindful of is the auto detect. You can turn that on or off, so it does detect what input is plugged in and turned on. Then you have the scenario mode. Again, this is like the picture presets. Here you have standard, FPS, RPG, racing, movie, iSaver, ebook mode, DCI-P3, sRGB, and then the Adobe RGB. The iSaver mode is going to increase the warmness of the monitor, so you're going to try to take out that blue light essentially. And then the ebook mode, this is going to turn this like black and gray, so it's more like a Kindle or just one of those tablets where you would just read off of it. And then last, you have the setting tab. Here you have language, then you have short key 1 and 2. Here you just have the brightness / contrast ratio, input, scenario mode, volume, and crosshair for your options. Then you have volume. Keep in mind this doesn't have any built-in speakers. This really just applies to if you plug a headphone into this. Then you have the picture-in-picture / picture-by-picture tab, information, and then reset. Shifting over now to my test results, we're going to start with the Spider X color calibration tool. We are checking for the color gamut accuracy because their claim was 100% coverage of the sRGB and then 95% of the DCI-P3. Here we have racing and the DCI-P3 modes. The picture presets in regards to racing, RPG, standard, things like that, these are all going to be the same. It's really these other ones where we have like a DCI-P3 mode or an sRGB mode. That's where you're going to notice that the results will be different, which is why I tested those. So for your standard picture presets, 100% coverage of the sRGB, 90% of the Adobe RGB, 94% of the DCI-P3, so we're 1% off. But keep in mind that's just with my Spider X color calibration tool. They most likely have far superior equipment, so I'm going to say that their claims here of the 100% and the 95% for these color gamuts are accurate. And then we have 86% of the NTSC. Shifting over to the DCI-P3, here we have 100% coverage of the sRGB, 87% of the Adobe RGB, 92% of the DCI-P3, and then 83% of the NTSC. So you're starting to see these numbers come down a little bit. After this, you have the Adobe RGB and sRGB. These are going to be more specific to an application like Adobe Photoshop or Premiere Pro, where you need that color gamut to really color grade or anything like that, because you're going to see these numbers come down, especially with the sRGB, but that is for every monitor. So if I was to test any monitor, just pull it off the shelf and it has an sRGB mode, if I go test it, the numbers are going to be way lower in terms of the color gamut compared to any of the other picture presets that they have. Starting with the Adobe RGB though, you have 99% of the sRGB, 87% of the Adobe RGB, 86% of the DCI-P3, and then 81% of the NTSC. For the sRGB, you have 98% of the sRGB, 73% of the Adobe RGB, 73% of the DCI-P3, and then 68% of the NTSC. For gaming, I would just recommend one of the picture presets or the DCI-P3 mode here, and then you can just tailor the rest of the panel to your liking in terms of the brightness, contrast, the color temperature, things like that. Shifting over now to the results of the on-screen response time testing tool. Here we're checking for the response time. It says 1 millisecond, then it doesn't quite specify what that's in regard to. My assumption again is that it is the DIC mode that they have. I didn't test that mode on this monitor. I've tested it on another monitor that I've reviewed from KOORUI, and that result we'll look at here in a second because it just proves that it has that black frame insertion, which is what an MPRT mode is. For this though, for the average complete time, and this is going to be on the normal response time, we have 14.11 milliseconds. So it's not fast, but it's not super slow either, like some of the VA panel monitors are that I've reviewed. This isn't going to best an OLED though, when you're looking at a comparison there, where those are typically 1 millisecond or lower. And then you have the best at 5.2, the worst at 13.2, and then the 02550, which isn't a gray to gray transition. This is going to be the full black to white to black transition, is 20.2. When we look at the RGB overshoots, we see no numbers here, which is really good, because if there were a lot of numbers here, that means we would have inverse ghosting, which we don't want. And then last, you have the visual response rating. It is taking the perceived response time, the RGB overshoot, it's taking those numbers and then putting them together and averaging them out. And so when we look at our average rating here, the higher the number, the better. Here we have an 81.44, so it is a solid B. After this, you have fast, and this is definitely the mode I recommend across the board, unless you're going to use the DIC mode. So here for the average complete time, it is 10.73 milliseconds. This is getting faster now. The best is 3, the worst is 10.1, and then that 02550 is 16.8. So even that we have seen is improved. We do see a handful of numbers on the RGB overshoot now, but this isn't anything that really translates to ghosting that I would visually see when I'm running something like a UFO test. And then last, we have the visual response rating, and we've seen an improvement here as well, where we're going to 86.6, so we're a very solid B now. And then last, we have fastest, and this is where everything breaks down. This is not a mode or a response time that I would use, because overall it gets much worse, and then we see a ton of inverse ghosting now. So for the average complete time, we are at 14.17 milliseconds, so we're really close to normal again. For the best, it is 3.6, the worst is 12.2, the 02550 is 16.6, which is lower than normal. But if you look at the amount of red on the perceived response time and the RGB overshoot, that's not good. So with the perceived response time, we see a lot of these transitions overall, if you were to compare them to the normal, have gotten a lot worse. Not just the average being closer here, just across the board, we're seeing some areas, yes, they're getting faster, but it's at the expense of these other transitions, which then shows up as this RGB overshoot, because when we see the red there, you very definitively will see inverse ghosting when running a UFO test, which means it's going to show up when you're gaming. Looking at the visual response rating, now we're dropping down to a C. We are at 74.71. So using this, I would say fast or normal is going to be your best bet. And then last, we are looking at that DIC mode, but this is the result from a different monitor that I've reviewed with KOORUI. And here, when you're looking at these zeros, this is how I know they have black frame insertion, because with the device, it's trying to register the transition in terms of these gray to gray transitions, which is where you're looking at numbers like the 153 by 51, and right there it's a 0. That means a black frame was inserted there. It didn't register anything. And then looking at the visual response rating, when it's trying to average this out, there's nothing to actually average out. It's a 0. So here, this is a black frame insertion based mode, which is what these MPRT modes are. It is a visual trick for your eye where it will visually look faster, because they're putting that black frame between every single frame in a game. Which the visual trick there is fine, and especially when they don't dim the panel, which we don't really see here. I like to use those types of MPRT or DIC modes, because usually with monitors in the past, it would make the overall panel very dim and it just felt unusable. That's not the case here. Just keep in mind what this is doing. It's not actually speeding up the monitor, it's just more of a visual trick. With that being said though, this is a very usable mode. On this monitor and the other one that I reviewed, I like the fact that the overall panel in terms of brightness stays relatively the same. You're not seeing this massive drop in that, which has always made the other ones that I've reviewed where they have a similar mode unusable, in my opinion. Here, very usable. The only thing to keep in mind outside of the fact that this is a visual trick is the fact that you have to turn off FreeSync Premium Pro. So you will not have the G-Sync compatibility mode. You won't have V-Sync. You have to turn that off. So you want to make sure that you have a GPU that can keep the frame rate very stable. So you're not going to get a bunch of screen tearing or anything like that. Shifting over now to consoles and what you can do with those, starting with the PlayStation 5 here, you essentially get all the options in terms of the resolution. So you're going to have 4K, 1440p, 1080p. You're going to have the variable refresh rate, you get HDR, you get the 60 and 120 hertz. With this, you also get the auto low latency mode, and then you're going to get the video transfer rate option here too. So again, basically all the options on the PlayStation 5. For the Xbox Series X, you get all the options here as well outside of Dolby Vision, which is a proprietary type of HDR. You also don't get the 24 hertz mode. That's not something I would typically use, but you have the 50 hertz. So you get 50, 60 hertz, 120 hertz, the auto low latency mode, you have a variable refresh rate, and then you have HDR, 4K, 120 hertz, all the bells and whistles that you would want for a console. So now that I've covered the specs, the in-panel menu, the test results, and what you can do with consoles, let's talk about what I like about this monitor. And I'm going to start with what I think is going to be the big draw here, which is the dual mode. Running 4K at the 160 hertz is awesome. I like 4K on these 27-inch monitors, and it's starting to edge out what's been the top spot for me, which is 32 inches at 4K, which obviously a 32-inch monitor is a decent size increase over 27 inches, but the pixel density or the pixels per inch goes down. So going from 32 inches at 4K to 27 inches at 4K, I can actually tell a really big difference in the overall visual clarity. The 27 inches just has a higher pixel density, so everything is a little bit more crisp. And so in that regard, this monitor is really good. With 4K, 160 hertz, that's a solid refresh rate. And depending on your hardware, the game that you're running, the settings that you have, you may or may not be hitting that refresh rate. On the second rig that I have in the house, which is what I use to run all the tests and everything and showcase gameplay for this monitor, I only have a 3070. And so that's at this point decently old. I'm not hitting 160 hertz in every single game in 4K. Some games it's more like 70 to maybe 90, 100 FPS. If I drop the settings down, then I can kind of get that more like 90 to 120. But the cool thing with this monitor in this dual mode is, let's say, hey, I do want a higher refresh rate. I'm playing an FPS game and that matters more. I can then shift this over to the 1080p 320 hertz. And so now with my 3070, I'm actually able to hit a higher refresh rate. In certain instances, I'm actually hitting the 320 hertz, and others I'm hitting somewhere in the 200s. And that's fine because now I have this larger scale or range of refresh rate that I can actually hit because I'm not just locked into the 4K 160 hertz. So with certain games like first-person shooters, I'm gonna lean more towards the higher refresh rate because the resolution still being 1080p on 27 inches, it still looks really good. It's not as good obviously as 4K, but it's still solid and very usable. So I'm going to lean towards that because that matters more in that type of game. Where if I'm playing an RPG or something like that, where I don't really need the super high refresh rate, I'm going to shift over to 4K 160 hertz because I want the higher resolution. And so like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this really feels like you're getting two monitors in one. If I just had the 4K 160 hertz and I'm locked in at that, and we didn't have this dual mode, I of course could just drop this down to 1080p and just take advantage of the 160 hertz. But here, with them doubling that refresh rate, 320 hertz is really high. You can tell the difference when going from 160 to 320. But even if you can't fully hit that in a game, you still have that large gap between 160 and 320. So if you can at least increase that, maybe settle into the mid 200s, you are getting more frames per second, which is awesome. And this all comes in at a very solid price point. I always mention I judge these monitors based off of their price point because I can't judge this in the same way I would an OLED that is 2, 3, 4, or even 5 times the price. That doesn't make sense. And this price point is very good. This is coming in right now at $300. So just $300 for a 4K 160 Hertz IPS is a really good deal. But now you have that dual mode, so you can also get that 1080p at 320 Hertz mode. And then with this being an IPS, you're getting a solid response time. I'm not seeing any type of input lag or massive screen tearing or anything like that, which is also partly dependent upon your GPU. But with this, the performance side has not lacked at all. It's been really, really good. And it's paired with the vibrancy that you get with an IPS panel in regards to the color. So KOORUI has another solid monitor on their hands here. This $250 to $350 price range is becoming more and more competitive. And I get a lot of questions about which monitor people should go with, and it really has to do with your preference and the things that you're looking for, because there's so many options and they're usually pretty solid. I haven't come across a ton that are just horrible and there's a lot of things wrong with them, especially from KOORUI and some other brands that are in this kind of mid-tier space. They have so many different options. What do you specifically want or need? Do you want that higher resolution with a solid refresh rate with a dual mode? Do you need something that has really good HDR and a bunch of local dimming zones? Because this doesn't have any local dimming zones. So on the HDR front, this isn't a monitor I would recommend. It's okay in terms of you can use it with a console or something like that, but in terms of like a high-end HDR experience, this isn't the monitor for that. It's not geared towards that. This is really for the 4K 160 Hertz, dual mode 1080p 320 Hertz, and that's what it's really, really good at. You're not getting extras in terms of extra USB ports and a KVM switch. And so if you need those things, there are other monitors in this space that do have some of those features, but they may not be 4K. They may be 1440p. They may not have a dual mode. They maybe have really good HDR, but then they don't have some of these other features. So what are you looking for your overall game experience? Maybe what presents the most options in regards to that as well, and then go with that monitor. But if you need 4K 160 Hertz, or again, this dual mode where you can get the 1080p 320 Hertz, you want solid visuals, you want everything to be really crisp, the performance is solid as well in terms of the response time, then this is a really good option. And then the last thing I did want to mention here is with the 4K resolution at 27 inches and that really high pixel density, it does mean that text on this thing looks great. Shifting over to the things I don't like about this monitor, I'm happy to report I don't have any. They're offering a really solid deal with just the overall performance and the visuals being top notch. And again, I judge this based off the price point, so I can't hold this to the same standard as a monitor that is far more expensive than this. With that being said, I do have some gray area things, which are things you may or may not care about. I'm going to start with the IPS panel glow. That is here. That's with all IPS panel monitors. The only way you kind of get around that is if it has a lot of local dimming zones and you can adjust the local dimming. Next, the stand and arm are plastic, which doesn't feel as stable and it doesn't look as good. And also because it's plastic, if you ever get that like white dust looking stuff on your PC or just anything that's plastic in your room, it's actually minerals that are attaching themselves to that. And so that white film coats this a lot. It's just like attracted to it more so than other monitors or PC cases or PC components, peripherals, things like that, that I've owned. So you may end up having to clean this quite often, but you could always mount this to a monitor arm if you didn't want to deal with that anymore. Next, the in-panel menu does not have a lot of options when it comes to adjustments that you can make to the panel. A lot of things that we may find on other monitors in the same price range, like more than 2 gamma options, it just isn't here. So there's a pro and con to that. The pro here would be less options for some people may feel better because they don't want to feel overwhelmed by that. The downside is if you do want a lot of customization over the visuals in regards to your panel, you don't have quite as much here. And just some other examples of that. You can't adjust the hue or saturation of the panel. The option isn't there. There's only 5 options for the quick access menu, where normally you may find like 10 to 15 options on another monitor. So I would say overall, there's probably about a third of the options that I normally find with other panels in this same price range just missing here. The option just is not there at all. Again, that could be a good or bad thing depending on your point of view with this, which is why it's a gray area thing. And then the last 2 things here are things I kind of touched on earlier, but HDR, if you need a top tier HDR experience, this is not going to be it. No local dimming zones with this, and it's 8-bit plus FRC, which for gaming is just fine. But if you need true 10-bit color for Premiere Pro or Photoshop or any type of application where you have to have that true 10-bit color, then obviously this is not going to work for you. But for gaming, specifically with consoles, this is solid HDR. It looks better than SDR in my opinion. On PC, I'm kind of like take it or leave it. If it does feel like it adds value to your gaming experience, then turn it on. It's solid as long as you adjust the different options inside of the game to really hone it in, because by default it's probably not going to look great depending on the game, but you can get it to look pretty solid. And then with this monitor, you're not getting any extras. And what I mean by extras is any RGB lighting on this, the KVM switch, no extra USB ports, no speakers. All that stuff is not here because they're taking all the money and they're putting it into a panel that has this dual mode. So they're forgoing those things. So if you need a monitor that has all of those extras and they mean something to you, especially something like the KVM switch, then you're going to want to look at the different monitor options that KOORUI offers. So that's going to wrap this video up. I think KOORUI has a solid monitor on their hands with the G2741L. And if you've been in the marketplace and looking for a dual mode monitor and you don't really have the budget for those really high-end OLED versions, now is the opportunity to take advantage of the affordable price that KOORUI has with this monitor and to experience the 4K 160Hz or the 1080p 320Hz. I'm going to have a link for this in the description if you want to pick it up. If you have any questions about this monitor that I did not answer in this video, let me know in the comment section and I will make sure to answer that for you there. And if you like the video, hit the like button for me as it helps the channel out. If you want to continue to follow along with all of my content, hit the subscribe button for me. And as always, thanks so much for watching and I'll see you in the next video.